In today's episode, we're diving into some truly intense and life-changing experiences. From hurricanes that caught people off guard to the terrifying aftermath, these are the real experiences of people who faced Mother Nature's fury and lived to share their stories. If you enjoyed the stories, don't forget to subscribe. I was about 23. A British girl backpacking around the States alone. I'd been to NYC and taken the Amtrak down the East Coast and around Florida with a ticket to fly out of Baton Rouge. No idea why I picked there. It just sounded nice. I got to New Orleans, checked into the not-so-hostel, and was tired. So I crashed. Woke up the next day, did some touristy stuff, and generally relaxed. I had over a week, so I wasn't in any hurry. I was vaguely aware of the weather forecast, but didn't think it was a big deal. The next day, the hostel put up a sign saying, "Katrina's coming." Still not at all worried, I went to the supermarket and stocked up. Someone in my dorm was trying to leave the city and found out there were no buses or planes. The following day, there was a news report, the mayor, I think, that said everyone had to leave the city or go to a shelter. I still wasn't too concerned. A shelter didn't seem like a big deal. So I packed my stuff with about a dozen other backpackers, and we went to the corner where we'd been told to wait. A bus picked us up and took us to the Superdome. At first it was cool. There were loads of people, but it was pretty organized, and it seemed like an interesting new experience. I stuck with the other backpackers. There were guards, but they were pretty relaxed. Everyone was really worried about protecting the AstroTurf, so we were careful. We set up camp on the bleachers and went to sleep for the night. The storm started around 6 and woke us up. It was incredibly loud and ripped off bits of the roof. It was scary, but eventually it was over. I remember seeing beams of sunlight shining through the holes in the roof. That was day 2. Then things started to get scary. I remember waking up to a woman screaming, "My baby! Someone took my baby!" There were a lot of unwell people. I have no idea if it actually happened or if it was a mental health symptom. People were coming down off drugs, and I think I saw someone fall or jump off one of the balconies. Every day, more soldiers came in with bigger, scarier guns. There were fights, and the whole place started to feel terrifying. There was no running water, and we were using the toilets until they were overflowing and filthy. We were trying to arrange to be transported out, so we went to meet with one of the army guys in charge. We went downstairs under the bleachers, where they were keeping all the really old, sick people. They were sitting in wheelchairs in 6 inches of water, and several seemed close to dying. After that, I stopped complaining and just got on with it. After 6 days, they moved us to the basketball stadium for a night, and then one of the big hotels. Every day they said, "We'll get you out today," but we'd have to stay another day. Finally, they got us on a bus. They wouldn't tell us where we were going, but we didn't really care at that point. I remember the bus driver being the nicest man. I remember we were given ready to eat meals and spent ages talking about food and what we missed. Then, as we were on the bus, we crossed the "Welcome to Texas" sign, and right there was a picnic at the side of the road. We were talking about how amazing food would be, not realizing they'd set it up for us. From that day on, Texas became my favorite state. We were taken to Dallas after that, and the embassy put me up in a hotel for the night, bought me waffles, and got me some clothes. That experience changed the way I think about resilience and survival. Sometimes you're caught in situations you never imagined, but you just have to push through and adapt. I'll never forget the kindness of strangers and the strength I found in the midst of all that chaos. I remember the day Hurricane Ike struck Texas and Louisiana back in 2008. It was Friday night, September 12th, 2008, in Houston, Texas. I was 11 at the time, and my mom and dad were sitting in front of the TV watching as Ike crept closer to Texas. My dad went to Walmart and got some dry food, flashlights, and batteries for the storm. I was really nervous because of the size of Ike. It was 450 miles wide, and the damage it might cause overnight. I was walking around thinking the worst and even taking one last look at my apartment complex with my neighbor's friend. It started getting windy around 6 p.m., winds around 40 miles per hour, and we got scared and ran home. Twigs from the 100-foot pine trees started to break off, and leaves were flying everywhere. My mom and I were walking to Pop's supermarket to get some last-minute things, and the checkout line was long. When we were finally done, the wind blew open the door, and everybody went silent. We went home quickly. Dad was in the bedroom with his hard hat on, playing with the flashlight as he watched the news. There was a phone bank with citizens asking Dr. Neal on Channel 11 about what kind of damage they could expect. I ran outside at 10 p.m., and the winds were still at 40 miles per hour, but they started to gust past 50. I was on my porch, watching the palm tree near me sway in the wind. The tall pine trees were bending slightly as I heard them rustle in the wind. More leaves and trash were airborne now. I couldn't stand against the wind as I tried to go downstairs, and it kept pushing me back. I gave up and went back upstairs once my folks told me it was no longer safe to be wandering. The wind was howling at the back window. My dad managed to use an old bed to cover the window, reinforcing it with the couch in his bedroom. I tried to fall asleep, but the wind was howling constantly, and gusts started to become more frequent. At around 11:30 p.m., it was getting blustery outside, and my dad tried to microwave a burrito, worst time for a snack, when the lights started to flicker. We ran to the closet, but we started to fuss when my mom didn't want to get in. She was terrified, and we tried to calm her down, but another loud gust blew in, and the carport downstairs started rumbling. The wind was making squealing and screeching noises. We were silent for a couple of minutes, staring at the back window. I could see an outline of the trees whipping in the wind from the streetlight. Dad and I went inside, and Mom slept in the living room. For another 30 minutes, the lights would flicker as we listened to Paul and Tom on the radio. I lay down on the floor while Dad sat on his big toolbox, playing with the flashlight. Around 12:30 a.m., we lost power, and the winds got louder. One minute it sounded like a train, and the next like a wolf howling. By that time, the winds were probably between 70 and 80 miles per hour. It was terrifying. In the sea of darkness, the palm tree was bending back and forth violently. Water was falling from the roofs like Niagara Falls. The giant pine trees were bending at 45-degree angles, with branches snapping off. I remember my mom opening the door to look, but my dad told her to shut it. She closed the door and finally took refuge in the closet. She was crying at one point, and we told her we were going to make it through. At 1:30 a.m., the back window shattered, and glass and rain started to pour in. I flashed a light to help Dad see. He had to get some trash bags to cover the TV and computer in his room, then pushed the couch to brace the beds that were covering the broken window, but the wind kept pushing them down. Around 2 a.m., the radio said Ike had made landfall at Galveston, and Houston and the surrounding areas were being battered by high winds and heavy surge flooding. Dad took note of the sky looking orange when we opened the closet door to let some cool air in, since it was hot inside. I heard debris hitting the building, and the wind was deafening. The winds were above 75 miles per hour at that time. All night, the wind was screaming. We spent 10 to 12 hours in the closet until noon on Saturday. It was a mess outside. Shingles littered the ground, and tree branches and twigs were everywhere. The courtyard was even worse. Pine trees were snapped in half, and entire trees were down. I helped our neighbors clean up the debris and clear the pathways. Dad went to get more food and water. We ate what we could and had to walk around to find some food and hot water. Mom and Dad were upset, but glad we made it out unscathed. We walked around the neighborhood, surveying the damage. There was a lot of tree damage and some leaning power lines. I couldn't sleep that Saturday night with all the humidity. My mom and I were listening to updates from the mayor and city officials. We were both scared out of our wits, and I cried, but my mom reassured me that we made it and were okay. By Sunday afternoon, the power was restored, and we started to learn about the true devastation Ike had caused. I was thankful that we didn't lose our home or, for that matter, our lives. Some areas along the coast were wrecked or wiped out by the storm surge. I remember the reporter on Channel 13 trying to keep his emotions in check as he went through the damage and ruins at Bolivar Peninsula. Watching the wreckage sent a chill down my spine, but it showed me the true power of these cyclones. Ike made me take storm preparations more seriously, and now I stock more supplies for every season. It may not seem like much of a story to you, but for me, it's a story I will tell my kids one day. In November of 2012, Hurricane Sandy hit our forested property near the Delaware River in New York. We had thought that since we lived a couple of hours inland and over 1,000 feet higher than sea level, we were fairly safe. We have always made some preparations in case of emergencies, but we had a lot to learn about being ready for a situation like this. We knew the storm was approaching quickly, and it was going to be severe. We had waterproof canoeing go bags ready, and we had a 625-gallon above-ground water storage tank and a good non-electric water purification system. Even our dog had his saddlebags packed with his food and supplies. But we were not prepared for the intensity of this storm. Bugging out was not an option, at least by car. When the storm hit, the winds kept getting stronger. Just when we thought that it was as bad as it could get, the wind picked up even more. Trees blew down and ripped out the power lines to our house. The circuit breaker box exploded. Several large conifers fell on top of our house, partially crushing the roof. Our daughter was watching the storm just as the wind hit, and a huge tree blew down and landed directly on the roof above her room. An old garden trellis, made from large timbers, took the brunt of the force and probably saved her life. We gathered the kids to the center of the little house, as far from windows as we could get. We had a few battery-powered LED lanterns lit because the power was out. Trees and down power lines blocked our street, so we had to shelter in place and tough it out. I think there might have been a tornado along with the hurricane, because some trees were twisted in half and not just blown down in one direction. Once the storm passed, we had to assess the damage. No one was hurt, thankfully. We made sure the propane tank was shut off and every appliance was unplugged. Clearing the driveway and property of downed trees and debris took several days. We had no intention of clearing the road of trees. It was too dangerous since the power lines crisscrossed everywhere. We were able to check on our neighbors and offer what assistance we could. We had to stay in the house since the roads were impassable and dangerous. Since we have a private well and use an electric well pump, we had no running water. We had plenty of fresh water in the water tank, fortunately, and every drop of water we consumed went first through our countertop purification system. After the house was rebuilt and the storm was mostly behind us, we made lists of things that we could have done better. The first thing we did was to make a plan in case we got separated. Perhaps next time an emergency struck, we might not all be home. We planned where we could meet and who we might call for information. Over the next couple of years, we invested a wood-burning stove and a generator that could run on either gasoline or propane. Gasoline was scarce for weeks after the storm and rationed. 20-pound propane tanks were available, though. We also built a battery bank for backup power, several deep cycle batteries connected to a power inverter, so we had 2 power sources. We now all keep a pair of jeans and sturdy, slip-on shoes next to our beds, so we are ready to go in 5 minutes flat. A few other changes we made to our preparations. We got 2 camp-type toilets, emergency non-perishable foods like freeze-dried backpacking meals, MREs, canned foods, more lanterns, and extra batteries of all types, and weather radio that runs on either batteries, AC power, or a crank dynamo. And we doubled the size of our garden. Some 8 years later, we continue to improve our emergency preparations and refine our plans. I had never witnessed that level of destruction or devastation before. The eye of the storm hit around 10:30 p.m., so most of the guests, including myself, were sheltered in the hotel ballroom. What made this storm unique, and the reason it caught the southern Baja Peninsula so off guard, was the fact that it rapidly intensified and changed course. It was originally forecast to head west and weaken as it went out to sea, but instead it made an almost 90-degree turn and headed directly for Cabo San Lucas as a Category 4. It was a Category 3 when it actually made landfall, but the millibars of pressure in the eye were extremely low for a Category 3, and the hurricane slowed and caused massive destruction. Because of the initial forecast, people were not encouraged to evacuate. Our hotel was as prepared as possible, technically designated as a hurricane shelter, with the ability to withstand a Category 3 storm, and had excellent safety procedures in place. But no one expected the storm to be as bad as it was. The hotel had a shelter set up in the ballroom, but also told guests that if they felt more comfortable staying in their rooms, they were welcome to do so, as long as they kept the windows and doors completely shut and did not venture outside. At the point of their original instruction, the hurricane was still not expected to be such a massive threat. My friends and I originally thought we would ride it out in our hotel room, and we were almost poking fun at the evacuation room that was set up. We figured we would hole up in our room with food and wine and watch movies until the government formally shut down the power grid, as planned and mentioned in the bulletins they were sending us. Everything was going as planned for us until about 8:30 p.m. The sliding glass doors were shaking violently, and then, all of a sudden, a large portion of a palm tree snapped off and hit our window. It didn't shatter, fortunately, but the scare was enough for us to put all of our things in the bathroom, grab our passports and wallets, and make a beeline for the hotel ballroom. At that point in our room, water was already starting to gurgle and get sucked out of the toilet, and the shower was making a howling noise. It also took 3 of us to pull the hotel door open because of the low-pressure suction. The hotel hallways were partially outside and exposed to the elements. By the time we, safely, thankfully, made it to the hotel ballroom, the hotel staff were already running rescue operations to retrieve people from their rooms. They were taking attendance on the hotel room roster and rescuing accordingly. There was an elderly couple being carried in with blood all over them from being cut by glass and some other injuries. None of them major, thanks to the incredible care and rescue efforts of the hotel staff. The main reason I felt this was an important story to share is because Odile was a storm that took everyone by surprise. We were incredibly lucky to be in the care of the hotel workers, who slaved away all night to keep us safe, but a lot of people were not so lucky, and the widespread destruction over the Baja Peninsula was immense. So, for anyone who doubts the power of Mother Nature and doesn't take weather warnings seriously, just take some advice from anyone who experienced Odile. Weather forecasts can change in a heartbeat, so always err on the side of caution. We were stranded in Cabo for an extra week because the airport was completely destroyed, and there was no phone service, internet, or any other form of communication. Our friends and family feared the worst after they didn't hear from us for several days. Food and water had to be rationed. The Mexican military had to perform food drops for the local residents because all of the roads were washed out. Needless to say, I made some lifelong friends during that week and saw things that I couldn't imagine even in my wildest dreams. Mother Nature is beautiful and amazing, but give her respect before it's too late, and she demands it from you. As we wrap up today's episode, our thoughts are with those affected by the recent disaster. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Feel free to share this video to spread awareness.